Glenn. Tonight, Obama's fuzzy budget math exposed. Plus, union thugs coming out with their own day of rage. How's that going to work out? We've got a lot to cover. Let's go. Hello, America. The House passes the continuing resolution to keep the government open. 59 Republicans voting no after last week's showdown that ran right down to the wire. This resolution seemed to pass with a lot less drama. In fact, no drama. And while the Senate is now mulling over the resolution, the House is set to take over the battle over the budget. This battle over the president's budget is a symbol of the great divide in this country. Do we keep spending, or is it time to start slashing our way to fiscal sanity? Yesterday, we saw President Obama make his pitch for fiscal responsibility, pledging to reduce the deficit by over $4 trillion over the next 12 years. Was it a slam dunk or just another brick shot, as Senator Orrin Hatch called it? Well, let's ask his right-hand man, the president's right-hand man, Vice President Joe Biden. Looks like a brick shot. Okay, now it's time for you to decide. Here's how it all breaks down. Number one, last week's $38.5 billion budget cuts. Here's how we addressed them. Take a listen.
The first step in our approach is to keep annual domestic spending low by building on the savings that both parties agreed to last week. That step alone will save us about $750 billion over 12 years.
Well, there's a little bit fuzzy about that math. Here's why. $38.5 billion times 12 comes out to only $462 billion. I'm not sure how Mr. Obama came up with $750 billion. Fuzzy math, I guess. Number two, cut defense. The president applauded $400 billion in defense cuts over the last couple of years. He says he can make those savings again. Do I need to remind you about Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, shoe bombers, underpants bombers, mailbox bombers? Cut spending now? Are you sure? Number three, Obamacare. The president says his health care law is going to reduce the deficit by $1 trillion. Premiums for regular Americans like us are on the rise. Help me out here. How will Obamacare save the Fed's money? And by the way, $1 trillion, did you just make that number up? And number four, get this, reduce spending in the tax code. Listen how this is supposed to work.
The fourth step in our approach is to reduce spending in the tax code. In December, I agreed to extend the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans because it was the only way I could prevent a tax hike on middle-class Americans. But we cannot afford $1 trillion worth of tax cuts for every millionaire and billionaire in our society, and I refuse to renew them again.
The key phrase there is reduce spending in the tax code. Tell me how raising taxes counts as a spending cut? Come on, Mr. President. We're not buying this fuzzy math. Obama math, after all. Do you think we're dummies or something? Let's ask Representative Paul Tonko of New York, a Democrat on the Budget Committee. How does the president's budget work for regular Americans, my friend? I'm trying to figure this out. He came up with $4 trillion, and for me, the math was more than just, it's kind of woolly, not just fuzzy.
Well, Eric, I think you have to look at the plan that was introduced by our Republican colleagues, the majority in the House. It was a raid on the middle class. It was cutting domestic programs and only domestic programs. All the concentration on cutting spending was done in that regard. It impacts our young with the education cuts, our seniors with health care cuts, veterans, working families, and small business. So it was not the sort of investment we need to move forward, and they were avoiding several of the other issues like going after
Representative, allow me, I apologize for cutting you off, sir, but here it was. It was billed as here. It was going to be a specific deficit reduction plan. We thought we were going to be filled with numbers. We were going to go exactly where the cuts, we were going to see exactly where the cuts were being made. Frankly, the only cut that we can sink our teeth into, that we can understand plain as day, is the defense spending cut. The rest of them seem to be, arbitrary $1 trillion numbers thrown around.
Well, No, I think what you have are a defense spending cut of $400 billion that he has suggested would be part of his plan, but also he avoids that further spending that comes with tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires and corporations that are offshoring jobs, they're outsourcing jobs, American jobs, and he has said that he will close those loopholes, and he will also avoid those tax cuts that would have been an expenditure. It's spending on money.
But sir, you got to stop right there. You have to stop right there. Closing a tax loophole, you're counting that as a spending cut? How?
No, I'm not counting that as a spending cut.
Well, he certainly did. He certainly did. He certainly did.
But I'm saying when we're spending on millionaires and billionaires and don't have the dollars to do that, by giving them a tax cut, that was the wrong thing to do. You're only,
Representative,
to me, I think what he's going to do is drive
when you allow
here.
someone to keep more of their own hard-earned money by lowering a tax, you're not giving them anything. You're not spending more. I don't see how you make that, how the left always makes that leap.
Right. You're giving revenues away that you simply cannot afford to give away. I think what we have to do is balance this budget. The president moves to address the deficit reduction by $4 trillion. And the way you do it is by looking at all of our choices out there. What they were avoiding with the alternate plan was looking at millionaires and billionaires who have not provided the trickle down that everyone anticipated twice over in the Reagan years and in the second Bush presidency. And what we're saying here is let's work so as to invest in our middle class.
I could have sworn I heard you say we should balance our budget. Is that what you just said?
I think that we are moving in that direction with this plan, and certainly we have to remember that unemployment is driving the deficit. What we see here is a new calculus coming out from Mark Zandi, who is the advisor in the presidential campaign for Senator McCain, and he just suggested that 1.7 million jobs would be the job loss with this proposal if it were to be adopted in our House, the Republican plan, and as many as 900,000 jobs in the first year. So over 3 years to lose 1.7 million jobs, you're just going to drive the deficit even deeper.
Do me a favor, before we let you go, we're going to lose your satellite in a minute here, but the $38.5 billion, by the way, which President Obama fought tooth and nail before agreeing to it last Friday night, $38.5 billion, he said over the 12-year span it's going to be worth $750 billion. Please help me. I can't figure the math out. It's fuzzy.
Well, I think what he does is calculate certain indexes that will produce that number. We're going to, obviously, as members of the Budget Committee, will review all of this. But look, this is a raid on the middle class. There's no mistaking it. They end Medicare. They end Medicare.
I'm a math guy. I'm a numbers guy. I follow the money. I don't find any way 38.5 times 12 comes up with 750. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't happen.
Right, Eric, I'll tell you, we will review every one of the numbers, but let me tell you that I cannot stand for a program that ends Medicare and requires our senior citizens of every vintage, of every decade here, to spend out of pocket. We're going to give them $8,000 toward an insurance coverage that's going to cost probably $20,000. That is a raid on the middle class. We end Medicare with this proposal. We reduce Medicaid at a time when you're going to impact the middle class.
Last quick question.
And,
I'm sorry.
I think it's too much pain invested in one area of the population of this country.
Sir, how do we come up with $1 trillion in savings, deficit reduction out of Obamacare? I'm not sure how that works, where that number came from.
Well, obviously, there is a huge impact on small business and the profitability that can come, the competitiveness that is enhanced for them if you reduce their health care costs, enables us to grow the economy. There are jobs associated with the health care reform.
I got to tell you,
sir,
I got to tell you, these assumptions, these are very, very aggressive assumptions, and frankly, we were looking for something a little bit more concrete. We're going to say thank you very much to Representative Paul Tomka.
I think we'll review all the numbers, and we'll show where the savings are.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us, sir.
My pleasure, Eric.
All right, you heard the president outline his fiscal plan for bringing down our nation's debt. He explained how he plans to reduce spending in the tax code. Take a listen.
They want to give people like me a $200,000 tax cut that's paid for by asking 33 seniors each to pay $6,000 more in health costs. That's not right. It's not going to happen as long as I'm president.
All right, one of the key phrases used yesterday was reduce spending in the tax code. Someone's got to tell me how raising taxes counts as a spending cut. I can't figure it out. We heard Paul Tomka from New York trying to tell us, don't worry, that's how it works in Washington. And then he went so far as to tell us the $1 trillion that they accounted for savings in Obamacare is going to come from upside to businesses going forward, not having to spend money on health care. Some very, very aggressive assumptions being made on the president's part, and frankly, on the liberals in Washington's part as well. The other one was $400 billion in spending cuts to defense. Again, a very, very costly time, maybe a scary time to be cutting defense spending. And then the fourth one, the one that we all can't figure out, is how $38.5 billion times 12 becomes a $750 billion savings to the deficit. The number comes to 462. Maybe the president will tell us exactly how that's going to happen. All right, let's see what we have here. We have the debt clock. We have the debt ticking away, $295 trillion, and spinning continues, keeps going. Meanwhile, the lawmakers in Washington are spinning their wheels too. Joining us now is Republican Congressman Steve King of Iowa. Republican Congressman, my concern here, sir, is $38.5 billion. We're looking for trillions and trillions of dollars in cuts. We come up with $38.5 billion. Please, is that enough, sir?
Yeah, that's not enough. We needed to draw a bright line, and we needed to stand on it. And I think the dividing factor here was who had the most willingness to face a government shutdown. I think that all along it was part of the strategy of Harry Reid and Barack Obama to push it towards a shutdown. I think enough things got put on the table that they wanted, enough taking off the table that we wanted, that they just couldn't come up with a good enough excuse to do what they already planned to do. So I think that's the biggest reason why we are where we are. The $38.5 billion, if that's what it really ends up being in real numbers, and not a lot of policy that we could have leveraged into this CR.
Representative, the American people out there are going, look, last Friday night we got down to 11:04 p.m., literally just a matter of hours before the government was going to shut down. The administration came out and said, don't worry, it's all clear. We're trying to figure out why is it all clear now. Why is $38.5 billion going to solve our $14.5 trillion deficit problem?
Well, it doesn't. And in fact, there's a pretty strong argument that our deficit increased during the period of time that we debated this greater than the amount of money we were able to cut. So even in the period of time of the calendar of the debate, I think we lost ground on the deficit. I think we've got to be a lot more bold, and we've got to be able to bring a budget that will get us to a balance in some time that we can actually hold accounting for. I had an individual yesterday who spoke at a breakfast I host who said, I have a 30-year-old son, and I don't know how I tell him that he can work his entire working life and be prepared for retirement before we get the budget to actually balance. What a depressing thing to think if you're starting your working career, or maybe the professional level of your working career, and know that you never get to see a balanced budget before you retire.
Then how did the Republicans let this thing pass at $38.5 billion, and how did it kind of sweep through the House this afternoon, and maybe probably going to sweep through the Senate in a matter of minutes? How does that happen? The American people are saying, no. $38.5 billion is not enough money. We need literally hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of real cuts, not these fuzzy math cuts that Obama pretends will happen over the next 12 years.
Well, I would have liked to have seen the $100 billion. I think that would have been a solid marker to put down in the time frame that we had. I would have accepted the $61 billion, but I also drew that bright line that said no funding for Obamacare. That's a $2.6 trillion outlay in the first full 10 years that it'll be implemented. And we should have stood on that as the biggest component that we needed to do battle with the president.
But you didn't.
Well, I did, but our
Right.
conference didn't. That's
right,
correct.
right. But listen, I'm still calling your feet to the fire as well. You didn't, and you know we're trying to Terry. You're trying to attach it to upcoming legislation, but you didn't. It's still there. It's still there. But right now, would you vote? Right now, would you vote to let the debt ceiling be exceeded and I guess, I don't know, allow America to default on debts? What would be the process? Would you vote? Are you going to vote to raise the debt ceiling?
Right now, I would like to see the Tom McClintock bill pass, which sets up the sequence of priorities on the debt that we will pay and keep our bonds in order. But right now, I'm a no on a debt ceiling, and I'd like to see what they have for proposals. There are a few things that might make that attractive. One is an incremental increase on it to buy a little bit of time. But I want to attach Obamacare to it and shut that off. And there are a couple other proposals that look attractive to me, but I'm going to stand on Obamacare.
Give us a sense, sir. How does the House look? I mean, is there going to be a vote? What's your, you must do a straw vote, figure out what the vote would look like right now. Give us a sense where it stands.
I think right now that probably the debt ceiling doesn't pass. And yet, especially the freshman class has been conditioned to vote to increase the debt ceiling since orientation here. So that's part of the equation. And what they're being told, I don't know at this point. But I would be looking at the 87 freshmen to see where they stand on this as a real good barometer on what the Republican conference will do. And right now, I don't think it passes. But on the other hand, they've got some days to work on this.
Congressman, very quickly, we're going to have to let you go in a second here, but did any of the Tea Party freshmen that came in, did any of them vote for the continuing resolution?
I think that I don't know which ones are defined necessarily as Tea Party, but I believe there are at least 20 freshmen that voted no on the continuing resolution. So I'd look at them as the core. And there are some full-spectrum conservatives that need to be rehabilitated because of some of the votes that they've had to take. And we can't hold them accountable for all this right now, Eric. I mean, this is a big deal, and you're focusing on it in the right way. But the freshmen were put into an arena that they could not have possibly been able to feel all of the currents that were flowing back and forth. I want to give them a chance to put their credentials back together, and I hope they can do it maybe on the debt ceiling.
Very good. Representative Steve King, Republican from Iowa, thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, with cities and states across the U.S. on the brink, lawmakers are desperately searching for a way out, but unions are saying, whoa, not so fast. We want ours. We'll hear from one guy who's backing the unions next. And sickouts breaking out all over the country as big labor whines about proposed cutbacks to bloated budgets. The irony is that overpaid, overbended unions are bulging state and local and federal budgets. Take Michigan, for example. The state is broke. Detroit is broke. So when newly elected Governor Rick Snyder suggested budget cuts to avoid a first major American city bankruptcy in decades, the unions went wild and took to the streets. The keynote speaker from yesterday's Michigan protest was the mayor of Lansing, Michigan, Verge Bonero. He joins us now. Verge, thanks for joining us. So is it so darn important to protect the wages and benefits of the union members that you're willing to bury a state, bury a city, throw Detroit possibly into a bankruptcy? Why won't you negotiate? Why won't the unions negotiate with the governor?
Well, Eric, of course they'll negotiate. And the issue is, that's one of the issues, is collective bargaining. Are we going to have top-down, where orders are dictated from state government like a monarch, or are we going to have collective bargaining, where the people have a right to bargain, which I think they do in this country? And I'm happy to live in a country where people can collectively bargain and where they can also protest, where they can petition the government for redress of grievances. So I'm proud to stand with union brothers and sisters and working people everywhere. And by the way, Eric, we talked about this before. You know, when organized labor does well, all working people, they raise wages for everybody. You know, those benefits and pension that some people enjoy, they didn't just come out of a genie's bottle. They came because of collective bargaining and the rights that labor won.
Mayor Verge, or when organized labor demands such a high salary that it's so far above the free market wage and benefits that in times, Verge, you know this, federal workers all in make double what the private sector makes. They make 4 times the benefits and almost double the salary, the wages of the private sector.
That's not true at all.
Unsustainable.
That's not true at all. I don't want your viewers to believe that. The fact is, when you compare apples to oranges, it is about equal, or the private sector does much better. The fact is, if you look at what a doctor working for the government makes, or a psychiatrist or psychologist compared to in the private sector, they make more. When you compare apples to apples, in fact, it is a decent comparison. And what's wrong with a little security? What's wrong with a little health care? Should people have to be forced into poverty?
You're misleading the public right now. The number is almost double. An average federal worker, an average Fed makes $123,000 all in. An average private sector worker makes $61,000, and they make 4 times the benefits. But allow me. But what that means is that puts the burden on. Forget small businesses for a second, because we'll talk about public sector unions. It puts the burden on states, municipalities, yourself, Verge. Lansing, how's Lansing doing?
Well, Lansing is struggling. Of course, Michigan is struggling because of the manufacturing that your buddies on Wall Street sent overseas. You know, it's a funny thing. You want to blame the unions. The fact of the matter is, and we've discussed this, and you can check it out, Google this. The fact is that when the unions were at their strongest in the 50s and 60s, everybody else was doing better as well. The fact is, when that union wage went up, it raised everybody else's wages.
Google this,
coincidentally, that was when America was making things.
That was
before your buddies shipped everything to China.
That's the
problem.
Google Lansing, Michigan, and let's find out what you have to do in your own town, because you have wages and benefits exceeding the revenues. You're going to have to cut people. You're going to have to cut people or lay them off. Is that right?
We're considering that. We're also considering increasing the millage rate. The fact of the matter is we are suffering as a state, and I'm trying to provide vital services. So, yes, we're suffering. We're also suffering from the loss of manufacturing, the hemorrhaging of manufacturing jobs. You know, when those jobs were here, these companies were making money. These companies were profitable. They went overseas because they could make more and because they lack patriotism. They didn't go there, and because they don't want to pay a decent living wage. Of course, in China, they can pay people dirt and pollute the environment. Why not go to China and India?
Blame all that.
How are we going to compete with that?
By the way, Verge, are there unions in China?
I'm sure not. Maybe
of course, and that's why labor is going over to China, because they don't have to pay exorbitant labor rates.
And is that what you recommend? Are you endorsing the kind of authoritarian government and the lack of free speech? They also go there for that, and they also have children working. Child labor, slave labor. Give me a break. Is that where we're headed? Maybe that's why people are in the streets, because we don't want to become China. We don't want to become India. Now, India is a democracy. People are. There's a little more freedom there. But the fact is there's a huge disparity between rich and poor, and that's where we're headed. The unions created the middle class in this country.
Disparity between people who work for the government and people who work for the private sector. The problem is when people who work for the government are paid double what the private sector is paid. It's unsustainable.
That is absolutely
and things
fallacious.
like Lansing, Michigan happen where you're going to have to lay off people or make some cuts.
That is absolutely false. That study is not apples to apples. And the fact is, you talk about this big deficit. You talk about the fact that the states are broke. The reason the federal government is broke in part is because you did away with the inheritance tax. You extended the Bush tax credits. We're tired of the trickle down. We're tired of the trickle down. That's what people were protesting. We'd like to see bottom up. How about you take care of the grassroots? You take care of the people here and let the growth happen from the bottom up instead of hoping that something, if we let people get rich enough, richer and richer, eventually some of it might trickle down. We're tired of being trickled down. That's what we said yesterday.
Verge, the bloated benefits and salary packages that you're offering state, local, and federal employees, or they're going to drive the state or the municipality into bankruptcy. By the way, it may not be a bad thing, because guess what happens in state bankruptcy or city bankruptcy? You can renegotiate with the unions.
Yeah, you can treat the unions like they do in China. Look, I know what you're trying to do, which is divide and conquer. Let the working people go at each other, when in fact it's the unholy alliance of Washington and Wall Street that has sold out Main Street all these years. That's what we're suffering from, these free trade policies. And how come we have all this money? We can go into Iraq, we can go into Afghanistan and fix those communities. How about we spend a little money domestically? Why don't you cut those programs and let's spend it here?
We spent a lot of money already bailing out states across the country. We have to leave it there. My good friend Verge, we'll see you again very, very soon.
Good to see you. Thanks, Eric.
All right, we know big corporations with close ties to Obama aren't picking up their fair share of taxes. So does Obama want to pick up the slack, or does he want us to? That's next. $14.2 trillion in the hole and counting. We're adding trillions to that number every year forward as far as the eye can see. In fact, we'll be at $21 trillion in debt by 2021. So who's going to pay for all this? It ain't going to be the 47% of Americans who pay 0 or less federal income tax, households that is. At the end of the day, it's you and me picking up the tab for all the spending. Maybe that's why it's so infuriating when you hear that big corporations with close ties to the White House aren't paying their fair share. Companies like GE, Google, Boeing. Here to break all this down is Tim Carney, senior political columnist for the Washington Examiner. Tim, the big one, the Mac Daddy of them all right now seems to be GE, making $14.2 billion, actually getting a tax credit at the end of the year at 2010. Break it down. Why does Google pay 20%? Why does Boeing pay little or no tax whatsoever and get government contracts on top of it? Help us out.
Well, first of all, I want to say, I'm not going to say who's paying their fair share or not. Nobody has said that GE did not follow the law or that Boeing did not follow the law. What we see when these giant, very profitable corporations are paying no taxes, we see a broken tax code. And we see that GE goes ahead and hires nearly 1,000 people to work in their tax division because, you know what, that's a profitable thing. They bring down their taxes. That's one of the most profitable sections of their whole company, I'm sure. And that's a problem with the tax code when a business needs to hire or can profit from hiring that many. GE, though, one example, and this is a sign that I think Obama's not serious about tax reform, they got over $100 million in green tax credits. So that's for, you know, building a windmill, solar panel factory or building windmills. So that's a lot of the tax credits that General Electric gets, goes from sort of dancing to the tune that the government is calling. You get a tax break if you do that.
And how does a small business compete with a big monster like GE who's paying no taxes? Meanwhile, small business probably pays 35%.
Yeah, well, you can hire a gigantic tax division, I guess, if you're a small business. Maybe you can afford 975 people like GE can. Obviously, a small business can't do that, and this is one reason why when government gets bigger and when the tax code gets more complex, the big guys actually do better. The
right.
media will always say, oh, it's big government versus big business, and if you want to slash government, well, you're just doing the bidding of Wall Street and big business.
Tell us, Tim, before we move on, but tell us, Jeff Immelt's the CEO of General Electric. He's now been tapped as Obama's job czar. Does that seem fair to you?
Yeah, well, the thing about Immelt is that he has always been on the same page as Obama. It's fitting, whether it's green subsidies, whether it's even embryonic stem cells, whether it's high-speed rail, the TARP, healthcare reform, they've always been on the same page. But no, I don't think there should be a job czar, but if it is, picking a guy like this who is just gaming government, to me that shows what Obama thinks the private sector is for, not sort of creating wealth to match demand, but trying to profit off of whatever the government is telling them what to do. So I find it fitting more than fair.
Tim Carney from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
Corporations aren't paying, and the White House wants us to pay, but who really should be paying? Here to discuss the solution to this question, the question, Neil Bortz, who should be paying? Neil, what do you look? You're a fair tax guy. Explain to us what would happen to a GE or a Boeing or a Goldman Sachs, for that matter, under a fair tax.
Well, remember, all taxes, as with some other things, roll downhill. The final analysis, Eric, the only entity, the only people who pay taxes in this country at all are individual consumers. All business taxes, all corporate taxes, they all end up reflected in the price of whatever item or service that business is providing.
So go ahead. Take it to the next step.
Your landlord.
Go ahead. Why? Well, and let's point this out. I should have written that a little bit better. A fair tax basically taxes consumption, not income. So if you go ahead and buy a pack of cigarettes, a loaf of bread, a six-pack of beer, you're taxed on that, but you're not taxed when you get your paycheck, right, Neil?
Well, exactly so. If you live in a state without an income tax, you make $2,000 a week. Every 2 weeks, you get a check for $4,000. Look, it's a consumption tax. Ask the people out there, would you rather pay 25% of everything you earn or 23% of everything you spend? And the details, Eric, you know the details. They're available at fairtax.org, and it would take us more time than we have to explain it all. But it gets rid of all personal income taxes, all payroll taxes, all corporate and business income taxes, and it just replaces them with an inclusive sales tax at the national level. The price of consumer goods do not go up because the embedded tax comes out. The fair tax goes in.
But Neil, and point this out. So it levels the playing field. So big corporations with, as Tim Carney pointed out, with full divisions of tax lawyers won't have an advantage against the small businessman who wants to compete.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No advantage at all. A small businessman can't go to K Street in Washington and pay $300,000 to a lobbyist to try to get them a special tax break in Washington, D.C. The small businessmen who provide most of the jobs in our economy, they're working at a huge disadvantage, while companies like GE say, hey, how about a couple of $1 billion so we can build a jet engine the military doesn't want?
Hey, Neil, I got to do this before I let you go. I have to ask you, a lot of people say the problem with a fair tax or a flat tax, any of these sort of consumption taxes, VAT tax, is that it creates a black market for goods. In other words, you can avoid a tax by doing barter trading.
Okay, real quick. You can avoid income tax as a solo act. If you want to avoid the fair tax, it takes two for that dance, and the penalties are harsh. Remember, 86% of all consumer purchases of services and goods come from major corporations, major businesses who are not going to take that chance breaking the law.
All right, Neil Boortz, we can say thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Eric.
All right, we want to hear from you. Does Obama really suck this much at math? Or is he just trying to kiss up and win some points with his liberal base? Go to my Facebook page at facebook.com/Eric Bolling, or find me on Twitter, twitter.com/Eric Bolling. Let me know what you think. Your comments could end up right here on the air. Up next, there's new evidence the State Department has on Iran, plus a U.S. lawmaker's wake-up call to Washington about, get this, the Muslim Brotherhood. Stick around. We'll be right back. The president and his cost-cutting proposals yesterday, there was a hearing that got little to no press on Capitol Hill. It focused on the Muslim Brotherhood. The chair of the House Intelligence Subcommittee on Terrorism, Sue Myrick, raised a red flag that the U.S. doesn't have a strategy to deal with a shadowy group that's trying to assume power in Egypt.
The federal government does not have a comprehensive or consistent strategy for dealing with the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliated groups in America. Nor does it have a strategy for dealing with the Brotherhood in Egypt or the Greater Middle East. We need to examine closely whether its true goal of setting up a worldwide Islamic regime is still in place.
Here now with their thoughts are Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch and author of Stealth Jihad, How Radical Islam is Subverting America Without Guns or Bombs. Dr. Jasser, let's start with you because you were one of the key witnesses in Representative Peter King's Homeland Security hearings a month or so ago. Tell us what you thought about the hearings today on the Hill.
Yeah, I can't tell you how important they are and how much of a service Congresswoman Myrick and the witnesses were doing in bringing to light a subject. When I talked about radicalization, I talked about a continuum, the fact that it's not just the violence at the end, but there's an ideology that separates some Muslim youth, not all, a minority, but a radical minority from the society, which is related to a slippery slope of political Islam. And we've been playing defense against the ideology that's not only domestic, but global. And the Brotherhood has been the primary cancer cell. And she really brought to light some very academic, poignant testimony about the fact that we've had no strategy. We've been fighting a cold war of ideas, not only just playing defense, but with no strategy at all. And if we're going to penetrate the ideas of political Islam all around the world, we need to enable liberal, secular Muslims to start to fight this on the ground, to begin ideas of reform, the separation of mosque and state, and to fight this offensively, which we have had no strategy of doing.
No strategy. Mr. Spencer, one of the things that concerned us most about Egypt when Mubarak stepped down was this, in fact, problem of the Muslim Brotherhood making their way in. Do we know if the Muslim Brotherhood is making inroads into Egypt now?
It's happening more quickly than anybody could have anticipated, Eric. You know, not long ago I was on your show, Follow the Money, and I said the Muslim Brotherhood is poised to take power in Egypt, and Juan Williams said I was fear-mongering. And now I just want to say to Juan Williams and to everybody else, I told you so. I tried to tell you the Muslim Brotherhood won 77% in a referendum just weeks ago in Egypt to change the constitution that will, in ways that will pave the way for its taking power. It is clear that it is the largest group in Egypt in opposition and the one that is poised to take power there.
Right.
And so they're going to establish an Islamic State, and we also have to remember that Representative Myrick is right. The Brotherhood is in the United States also.
Right. We'll get there, sir. We'll get there, Mr. Spencer. We'll get to
so on.
We'll get to the U.S. Dr. Jasser, less than 30 seconds or so. Tell us, is this a different Muslim Brotherhood than the one we know from past, I guess, terrorist ties?
Yeah, their core ideology, they may eschew violence, but their core ideology of Islamic supremacism, establishing an Islamic State through Sharia law, is still in place. They've never condemned that, and they haven't stepped away from it. But I hope people understand that we need to get out of the morass that created these groups, which was the dictatorships in the Middle East, and we may step backwards first, but the progress in the Middle East may seem messy, but it's the only way out of this, Robert and Eric, and I hope people see that this is the only way out, is to get rid of these thugs and get us on the ground to help mobilize them towards some type of secular democracy.
All right, we're going to continue this discussion. We're going to take it to how it's affecting us right here in the United States after the break. More with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser and Robert Spencer in a couple of minutes. The American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and Robert Spencer, director of Jihad Watch. Mr. Spencer, you touched on it in the last block. Let's talk about it now. How does what's going on in Egypt, in fact, even in Libya, affect us here in America?
Well, Eric, we have to remember that the Muslim Brotherhood has a strategic goal for the United States that was delineated in a captured internal document that was unearthed a few years ago, and it's dedicated in the United States, in its own words, to eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. That same document lists all the major Muslim organizations in the United States as Muslim Brotherhood-linked organizations, including the Muslim American Society, the Council on American Islamic Relations, parent group, the IAP, the Muslim Students Association, the Islamic Society of North America. These groups are brotherhood groups that are working in the United States to subvert the U.S. Constitution and ultimately to replace it with Islamic law. And we have to recognize that and recognize that that's a political agenda that free people need to fight and resist.
Dr. Jasser, do you agree with Mr. Spencer? I mean, the one that really sticks out for me is CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations. They're very much out there. They're very much trying to paint the picture of Muslims being not extremists, not radical, but Mr. Spencer says maybe they are. What do you think?
Well, I think, many of our families came to the U.S. to escape sort of these Islamist groups that claim to speak for us, and CAIR is one of those examples. I mean, one of the best examples, Eric, is just a couple weeks ago, there was released and published on FoxNews.com a letter that Nihad Awad, the head of CAIR, sent to the Gaddafi thug asking for $15 million for his Peace Foundation, in which he called Gaddafi the excellency of Islam, the great Muslim leader, etc. So you see how important it is that these dictators are completely in bed with the Muslim Brotherhood front groups, these legacy groups that claim to speak for Muslims, but they're all about control, collectivization of our community, trying to say that we all speak as one rather than the diversity that we really are, which is those of us that want liberty, that want freedom, that want separation of mosque and state, and want to stay away from groups like CAIR and Brotherhood type mentality.
Mr. Spencer, let's say the Libya right now. I mean, there's a power struggle going on in Libya. Frankly, it may divide the country in half, or either the rebels or Gaddafi could win out. But if the rebels take over, do we know that there's no Muslim Brotherhood or even Al-Qaeda or Taliban involved with the rebels?
Well, actually, we know just the opposite. We know that there's a significant Al-Qaeda presence among the rebels. We know that one of their trainers is a Guantanamo detainee who was released in 2008. We know that eastern Libya, the center of resistance to Gaddafi, was also the center of jihad warriors going from Libya into Iraq. More came from that area of Libya than any other region of the Islamic world into Iraq to wage jihad against American troops there. And so this is the resistance to Gaddafi. Here again, just as in Egypt, we're going to see an Islamic State in Libya following Gaddafi that's going to be even more hostile to the United States than he is.
Dr. Jasser, very quickly, the rebels have asked us for a $2 billion loan, a little help there. Would that be a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, I think the only money we should be putting in is money that we follow in with people on the ground to help them build institutions, not from arm's length, but us working with secular Democrats on the ground for solutions, because these problems we keep talking about exist, but they exist because we've sort of left the Middle East to be at the hands of dictators, and it's time for us to get the ideas of liberty infused on the ground so that we have the advocates like we did in Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia. When those dictatorships left, we went there and advocated for freedom, and we need to help them build those institutions, but not just dumping money at it.
Right.
We need to follow it.
Fascinating topic. Thank you guys, Mr. Robert Spencer and Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Thank you guys. All right, we've been talking about Obama's fuzzy math. I want to know, can he really suck that much at math? I shouldn't say that. Does he stink that much at math? Or is he just trying to kiss up to the liberal base? What do you think? Log on to Facebook.com right now, Facebook.com/Eric Bolling, or let me know on Twitter. That's Twitter.com/Eric Bolling. Tell me what you think. I'm going to read the results of the poll and some of your comments next on air.
Tomorrow, it is time to take a stand. All of us together as a nation. We stand in defense of Israel. Friday, 5 p.m.
Throughout the show, we've been asking you, does Obama really stink that much at math, or is he just trying to kiss up to his liberal base? Now, here's what you had to say about it. 91% say Obama's just kissing up to his base. 9% say he's just that bad at math. Let's take a look at some of your comments coming in on Facebook. Mike says both. Hasn't called you yet, by the way, laughing out loud. Rosemarie says he's sucking up to his base, but his base must be pretty stupid if they can't do the math themselves. Doug says no, he just comes about things from a way he's been taught during his Marxist education. Catherine says Obama is far too brilliant to suck at math. He must be scheming something. And then Daniel says it's not that he sucks at anything, but he doesn't bother to check and verify what he's asked to tell the American people. I'm going to say thank you to everyone. I'm going to say good night. I had a great time. See you later.